December 1944. A forward command post sits in the frozen woods near Bastogne, Belgium. Freezing mud covers the entire ground as clerks type up combat decorations inside a cold canvas tent. A white regimental commander picks up an official metal recommendation form for a black tank crew. These men recently destroyed 3 German Panthers in heavy combat. The commander dips his pen in black ink and slashes a thick line straight through their names. He writes that their fierce life-or-death struggle is nothing but a routine engagement. Across the camp, a decorated white officer looks at his own new medal and flatly refuses to wear it until those black tankers receive their proper honor. General George S. Patton is about to discover this paperwork erasure. He will soon force this prejudiced commander to physically face the very men he tried to turn invisible. This is the incredible story of what General Patton did when an arrogant Mississippi colonel denied silver stars to a brave black tank crew and found himself forced to pin those very medals himself. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the raw World War II stories that show when the uniform is the only skin that matters. Sergeant William Coleman was a 28-year-old tank commander from Detroit, Michigan, serving in the historic 761st Tank Battalion. Before the war, he worked on the intense assembly lines for the Ford Motor Company, where he learned the precise mechanics of heavy machinery. He left behind a wife and 2 young daughters to fight in Europe, enduring months of frozen grease, bitter steel, and the constant threat of anti-tank artillery. Coleman was a quiet leader who focused on keeping his 4 crew members alive through the worst conditions the European winter could throw at them. He had already seen his men accomplish remarkable feats of bravery on the front lines, only to watch their efforts go completely unrewarded by the white command structure. On that freezing December day near Bastogne, Coleman guided his Sherman tank through a brutal 6-hour firefight, successfully destroying 3 German Panther tanks and holding a critical bridge crossing against overwhelming odds. Colonel Beauregard Pendleton was a 49-year-old regimental commander from Jackson, Mississippi, who viewed the battlefield through the lens of an older, rigid social order. He was a career military officer whose great-grandfather had fought for the Confederacy at the siege of Vicksburg. Pendleton despised the evolving nature of the modern military, frequently telling his subordinates that the integration of armored units was the worst decision the War Department had ever made. He operated far behind the immediate danger, sitting comfortably inside a dry, well-heated command tent. He wore a pristine, custom-tailored uniform and expensive leather boots that remained completely untouched by frontline mud. A large, framed portrait of Robert E. Lee hung prominently on his canvas wall, facing the wooden desk where Pendleton handled the paperwork of the regiment. It was at this desk where he regularly turned his pen into a weapon, ensuring no black soldier under his administrative control would ever receive recognition for combat valor. In December 1944, the Ardennes forest was a landscape of white snow and black iron. The German army had launched its final desperate counter-offensive. They caught the Allied lines by surprise. This created a massive bulge in the front. Thousands of men were trapped. Many were fighting for every inch of frozen ground. In this environment, logistics were a nightmare. The chain of command was under immense strain. Units were often fragmented. Small crews were left to fend for themselves at isolated road junctions and bridge crossings. It was a time of total war. Performance on the battlefield was supposed to be the only metric that mattered, yet the United States Army was still a segregated institution. It reflected the deep-seated prejudices of the era. Black soldiers were often relegated to support roles. But the 761st Tank Battalion had fought hard to prove they belonged in the thick of the combat. They were under the administrative control of white officers. In many cases, these men had been raised with strict views on race and hierarchy. In the heat of the bulge, many senior officers let administrative biases slide. They focused entirely on the German threat. They ignored the quiet injustices happening within their own tents. They were too busy counting casualties to count the medals being systematically denied to men of color. The paperwork for valor was supposed to be sacred. It was the only lasting record of a soldier's sacrifice. But for some commanders, the pen was a way to maintain an old social order. This happened even in the middle of a world war. While the guns thundered in the distance, a different kind of battle was being fought on the desks of the regimental command posts. The ink was drying on 2 reports. They described nearly identical acts of heroism, yet their outcomes were destined to be worlds apart. Back inside the quiet command post near Bastogne, the silent erasure of Sergeant Coleman's courage was almost complete. Lieutenant Samuel Reeves, 26, from Cleveland, Ohio, walked into the regimental command post holding a folded piece of paper. He was a tank commander with the 11th Armored, and his crew had just been notified of their silver stars. But he was not there to celebrate. He found Colonel Pendleton sitting behind his desk, polishing a silver cigarette case with a silk cloth. Reeves said, "Colonel, I have reviewed the commendation list for the actions on the 19th. Pendleton looked up and said, "It is a fine list. Lieutenant, your crew performed admirably at that road junction." Reeves said, "Thank you, sir, but there is a name missing. Sergeant Coleman and the crew of the 761st. Pendleton said, "That was an administrative decision. I have already signed the finalized forms," Reeves said. "They took the bridge. Colonel, they knocked out 3 Panthers while my crew only engaged 2. Pendleton said, "I am well aware of the tactical reports, Reeves." Reeves said, "Then why were they left off?" "Their engagement lasted 6 hours under direct artillery fire." Pendleton said, "It was a routine engagement, Lieutenant. It did not warrant a decoration of that magnitude." Reeves said, "With all due respect, sir, if 3 tanks and a 6-hour bridge defense is routine, then my 20 minutes at the junction was a holiday." Pendleton set his cigarette case down with a sharp click and said, "You are forgetting your place." Reeves said, "I am trying to understand the standard, Colonel. The Army regulations state that valor is the only metric." Pendleton said, "I decide what constitutes valor in this regiment." Reeves said, "Coleman's loader was wounded. They stayed in that turret until the last German turned tail." Pendleton said, "That is what they are paid to do." Reeves said, "Then I am officially refusing my Silver Star. I will not wear a medal that is based on a lie of omission." Pendleton stood up slowly and said, "You will accept the award I have bestowed upon you." Reeves said, "I cannot, sir. Not if Coleman is denied for the exact same work." Pendleton leaned over the desk and said, "You Cleveland boys think you can change the world with a few polite words." Reeves said, "I just want the record to be honest." Pendleton said, "The record is exactly as I want it. I will not have my command history filled with the names of people who have no business in a tank." Reeves said, "They are some of the best tankers I have seen in this theater." Pendleton said, "They are a mistake by the War Department. I will tolerate their presence because I must, but I will not elevate them to the status of a white soldier. The Silver Star is a sacred thing. It is not meant for them." Reeves said, "So the bridge does not matter? The dead Germans do not matter?" Pendleton said, "Not if the hand on the trigger is the wrong color. Now, get out of my tent before I strip those stripes off your sleeves." Reeves did not blink. He saluted, turned on his heel, and walked straight to his quarters. He sat down and wrote a letter. He attached his own action report and Coleman's side by side. He bypassed the regimental clerk and sent it through a contact at 3rd Army headquarters. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the regimental command post unannounced. The general walked into the canvas tent in full uniform, 4 stars visible on his helmet and his ivory revolvers on his belt. Everyone in the room registered his presence. The entire room went completely silent. Patton did not raise his voice. Colonel Pendleton snapped to attention. Patton looked at him, then tossed the 2 action reports onto the wooden desk. Patton said, "Colonel, did you review these tank engagements from the 19th? Pendleton said, "Yes, General. I processed them myself." Patton said, "You awarded the fight crew Silver Stars and gave the black crew nothing. Why?" Pendleton said, "The white crew performed with distinct valor, sir. The other action was merely routine." Patton said, "Routine. So destroying 3 Panthers and holding a bridge for 6 hours is routine under your command?" Pendleton said, "Given the circumstances and the capabilities of those men, yes, sir." Patton studied him. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the tent. He said, "You have commanded this regiment for 18 months, Colonel. In all that time, you have not recommended a single black soldier for any decoration above the Good Conduct Medal. Every form has the exact same notation. Routine engagement. By your standards, a white crew that destroys 2 tanks deserves the Silver Star. A black crew that destroys 3 tanks and holds a critical bridge for 6 hours deserves nothing. You have reversed the awards based entirely on race. Sergeant Coleman and his crew fought in freezing mud while you sat by a stove. They did the harder, longer work. They bled to protect your flank. You did not just deny them recognition, Colonel. You tried to erase them from history. I am not asking you to explain. I am telling you what you will do. You have a choice. Take these 3 Silver Star boxes and drive to the field position of the 761st Tank Battalion. Stand in the mud, pin the medals on their chests, read the citations aloud, and salute them perfectly. Then return here and revise every recommendation from the past 6 months using an equal standard. Promptly, or I will relieve you of command immediately and process you for a court-martial for racial discrimination affecting combat efficiency. Decide now. Pendleton stared at the medals. His face turned completely white. He realized the world he thought permanent was changing. He reached out his hand, took the boxes, and silently walked toward his jeep. Colonel Pendleton arrived at the 761st Tank Battalion's position 10 minutes later. The wind was a razor. The mud was deep and gray. He stepped out of his jeep, and his expensive leather boots sank instantly into the sludge. Sergeant Coleman and his crew stood in a perfect line. They were covered in grease and the grime of combat. Their faces were weary. They simply waited. Every soldier in the battalion had gathered to watch. The silence was absolute. Pendleton's hands were shaking as he opened the first velvet box. He reached out and pinned the Silver Star onto Sergeant Coleman's field jacket. The cold metal brushed against his fingers. He smelled the diesel and the spent cordite on the man's uniform. Pendleton stood straight and read the citation aloud. He moved to the next man, and then the next. He forced himself to look each soldier in the eye and thank them for their service to the United States Army. When the last medal was pinned, Pendleton stepped back. He stood in the freezing mud and raised his hand in a slow, sharp salute. Sergeant Coleman returned it perfectly. The colonel had spent years trying to erase these men with his pen. Now he was forced to stand in the filth and honor the very valor he had denied. William Coleman returned to Detroit after the war. He went back to work at the Ford auto plant, quiet and unassuming. He raised his 2 daughters and never boasted about his Silver Star. He kept the medal in a velvet box in his bedroom drawer, a silent testament to the bridge near Bastogne. He lived a full life surrounded by his family and passed away quietly in 1982. The moment in the freezing mud of Belgium remained with him always, a reminder that true valor could be ignored but never truly erased. Colonel Beauregard Pendleton was relieved of his command and quietly reassigned to a stateside training depot within a single week of the incident. His career in the active theater was effectively finished. He retired from the Army shortly after the war ended and returned to Jackson, Mississippi. He lived out his remaining years in bitter isolation, watching the military he once knew integrate completely. He died in 1963, never understanding that the world of his ancestors had vanished forever in the snows of the Ardennes. General Patton never spoke of the incident publicly. He kept the original action reports locked away in his personal desk for the remainder of his life. However, he left a strict directive for Pendleton's successor, noting that the standard for decoration in his army was action, not race. In a private journal entry written shortly before his death, Patton reflected on the true nature of leadership, writing that a real commander judges a man by the grease on his hands and the fire in his eyes, not the color of his skin. Some historians have argued that Patton's dramatic intervention was a localized action driven more by his obsession with combat efficiency than a calculated effort to challenge systemic segregation. They point out that he remained a man of his time, focused strictly on winning battles. Others have argued the opposite, maintaining that his decisive handling of the situation set a powerful, non-negotiable precedent across the Third Army, forcing prejudiced commanders to recognize black battlefield contributions. What is certain is that the combat record of the 761st Tank Battalion established an undeniable legacy of valor that paved the way for the ultimate integration of the American armed forces. If you had been in General Patton's position that day, would you have forced the colonel to stand in the mud, or would you have found a quieter way to handle the situation? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about when the uniform is the only skin that matters, make sure to subscribe.